وفلسفية. كان بحثا جميلا محو فلسطين، دور هيئة الإذاعة الكندية في ترسيخ السرديات الاستعمارية والدعاية الإعلامية أو إدامة الرواية الاستعمارية. أتوقع أن تسمعوا شيئا جميلا في هذا البحث. معنا ميمونة خان، يحيى اللهيب، جلال كواش، وكريستو ألمر. تفضلوا، احنا معكم.
مساء الخير عليكم. أولا أبدأ بالرحمة والتحية للشهداء ولصمود فلسطين وغزة. I will switch to English because the presentation and the work is in English. My name is Yahya Lahib. And I am here presenting with my colleague Maimuna on Erasing Palestine, CBC's role in perpetuating colonial narratives and media propaganda. And this is a small effort on our part not to be silenced. And because we believe silence is complicity, we feel that this is our role in resisting in the spaces we occupy. Can you see my screen? Because I'm not sure. Oh, perfect. Thank you. To set the context for this study, we situate our work within Canada as a settler colonial state. Within that history of settler colonialism, Canada's complicity in genocide against indigenous people on Turtle Island. And that speaks to the Canada's experience in genocide, in erasing people, and in colonial practices. The CBC, or the Canadian Broadcasting Company's role in sanitizing and absolving Canadian colonial history and the promotion of the state propaganda. So our effort here is to call out Canada's history and contemporary manifestation of colonial practices, but also to call out Canada's media's outlets and how those colonial practices get to be sanitized to absolve the state from its role in the manifestation of the genocide. Contrary to the ways CBC and Canada promote its role as a space where the CBC celebrates Canada's culture, Canadian culture, and support democratic life through a wide range of content that informs, enlightens, and entertains. That's the message they try to demonstrate to the world, and then Canada as a peace-loving country. However, what we see in practice is contradictory to this, whether through immigration policies, whether through Canada's complicity in the ongoing genocides, not just in Palestine and Gaza, but also in manufacturing consent for the genocides and the dominance of the West and Western ideologies. So our study relied on a critical discourse analysis methodology. Discourse analysis or critical discourse analysis purpose is to analyze text for the social process in its use of language and discourse. And it assumes that language and discourse act as powerful mechanisms that reveal how power and dominance operate in a society. So we analyzed a total of 77 articles between October 9 and February 22nd, 2024. And this presentation demonstrates findings from 20 of those articles only, just to give you a sense of how the genocide has been sanitized in the West. Three key findings that we want to highlight from this paper. One, the representation of the ongoing genocide relies on distorting facts to obscure the Israeli crimes and the ongoing genocide in Gaza. The normalizing the issues to depoliticize occupation and apartheid, and to demonize Palestinians through biased framing and misinformation. And my colleague Maimouna will speak specifically to each of those themes.
Thank you. As we begin to demonstrate the findings for you over the next few slides, I want to emphasize that these three primary propaganda tactics that are employed by the CBC serve to actively support Israel as settler colonialism and legitimizes ongoing Israeli aggression, whether that is through moments of so-called ceasefires or through violations of those so-called ceasefires. And essentially what it's doing is silencing anti-colonial discourse. And so our overall findings demonstrate systematic unprofessionalism, misinformation, and propaganda in CBC's coverage, which again, we emphasize the CBC who likes to promote themselves as neutral and as central and as accurate information providers. In our findings, we will demonstrate its hypocrisy. So our first theme here is that we found in our analysis is the CBC employs this tactic of distorting facts to obscure Israeli crimes. So in much of its coverage, the CBC fails to adequately report on the magnitude of the genocide in Gaza, including the scale at which it affects Palestinians on the ground in occupied Palestine, but as well as Palestinians in the diaspora. And this takes shape in a number of ways, primarily by denying and downplaying the suffering experienced by Palestinians, obviously negating the kinds of resistance that is exemplified by Palestinians as well. In the two examples that we show on the screen here, it demonstrates how the CBC will provide the Zionist occupation with the last thought in order to discursively provide justification in an indirect way. So what I mean by this is, although the CBC and our news media will provide information about, the UN, the UN's reports or reports coming out of the Zionist regime, it always provides Israel and the Zionist regime with the last thought in its documentation or in its reporting. So, for example, on the screen, in the quote, the first quote that you see, it will say that Israel, on the other hand, has maintained the blockade is necessary to protect itself. And this is a way for it to continue to demonstrate that there is a so-called right to defend oneself by the Zionist regime. It also distorts that Hamas controls Gaza, and therefore any reports or any statements that come out of the health ministry are seen as inaccurate or not credible. So on the second quote here, you'll see that it says that the health ministry in Hamas-controlled Gaza said in a statement on Friday, and some reports on the number of Palestinians that have been killed, including children, from Israeli strikes. So this not only sees Palestinians as not ordinary people, but as Hamas militants, thus erasing their experiences of death as well as their experiences of destruction. Another key tactic, going on the same thought, a clear tactic of propaganda employed by the CBC is in this masking of Israeli crimes and violence. So the CBC often hides instances where airstrikes were made in densely populated areas, instead usually frames it as a declaration of war and launching airstrikes in the Gaza Strip. In fact, the current Israeli genocidal attack on densely populated Gaza is described as a major ground campaign, constructing it as a military excursion as opposed to calling what it is, which is an ongoing genocide. So the CBC uses this soft language to minimize the severity of the incident. And by incident, we refer to the ongoing incidents that take place on a daily basis, no matter how small they may seem to news platforms and news media. And so, for example, here we have another example here saying that Palestinian was killed during a confrontation between Palestinians and settlers. This is another example of softened language to refer to reports of illegal settlers attacking Palestinians. the CBC will often omit that the attack was in fact an attack, instead referring to it as a confrontation, which obscures and absolves the settler's responsibility here in being an illegal settler. Another example of this kind of language that distorts facts to obscure these crimes are the language of died versus killed. So the death versus killed example justifies the violence committed by the Israeli military, but it also minimizes that the deaths are caused by Israeli killings. So when we are seeing reports of more than 2,200 people have died amid the ensuing Israeli response, we see here how this lacks any kinds of accountability that Israel actually is committing these acts of violence. And masking killings as deaths is a common tactic that's been employed through many of the articles in our data set, and they demonstrate how Western media has actually minimized the responsibility of the illegal state of Israel in the mass murders that have taken place. So here we see the CBC shift the blame from Israel as the murderer to blaming Hamas for its October 7th attacks when it refers to the ensuing Israeli response. So not only does it falsely refer to killings as targeted, but also fails to convey the humanity of Palestinians. So the second theme in our findings that we would like to share with you is about how the CBC depoliticizes the narrative of the ongoing genocide. Particularly, this is through the use of the language of the genocide being a conflict. And this not only serves to feed into Israeli propaganda, but it shows this idea of a two sides narrative, which can be seen in examples when when the CBC refers to genocide as a two-sided conflict between Israel and Hamas. Similar to other tactics shown in our findings, this ignores the reality of an occupying force with an overwhelming military power, which is systematically oppressing a civilian population. And ultimately, using the term conflict, as folks in the room will know, it depoliticizes the narrative by stripping the events of their history and context and masking the reality of occupation and genocide against Palestinians. An interesting mechanism that has come up in the Canadian media and in the CBC is emphasizing the individual fear of Jewish Canadians. And so there's a great emphasis on Jewish fear in many articles that serve to depoliticize the narrative of the genocide and conflates critiques of the state of Israel as an attack on the Jewish people as a form of anti-Semitism. And this individual fear, when the media is focusing on fears of individuals, it removes the focus from the broader political complexities of the ongoing genocide. And articles would typically highlight similar stories around personal safety and personal fear and safety concerns. However, we argue that such a focus really effectively depoliticizes the discussion by framing the issue as an individual issue rather than a community issue and an issue of community security. This type of coverage occurring in the context of a lack of adequate reporting of the broader geopolitical situation really should be seen as a tactic of distraction and a tactic of gaslighting its readers. So the third theme that we'd like to present here is the theme of demonizing Palestinians. So building on our last slide, the CBC is continuing to emphasize anti-Semitism as a significant component of the ongoing genocide. In many of its reports, in fact, I would argue in most of its reports, it has emphasized accusations of anti-Semitism as central causes for and central outcomes of the current situation, which fail to address the real cause of the genocide, which we know is occupation, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid. Not only does this distract from the genocide at large, it continues to ostracize any kinds of opposition to Zionism and the Zionist entity as being anti-Semitic, effectively shutting down space for critical discussion or to hold the illegal state of Israel accountable for its crimes against humanity. So when we see a focus on Zionist fear, For example, in the quote that we have on the screen here, this is an example of a Zionist Canadian recalling when their families were slaughtered in their homes on October 7th, and having an irrational fear that their neighbors in Canada, and by their neighbors in Canada referring to Palestinians as well as their supporters, will do the same. So this story not only includes false details that support Israeli propaganda, but it further emphasizes this irrational, individualized fear held by some Zionists, while maintaining the construction of those who oppose the genocide as being dangerous and capable of so-called slaughtering people in their homes. So this, again, it distracts from the broader and more dangerous realities. If you could just go back to that slide, please. This again distracts from the broader and more dangerous realities of the ongoing genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. In our second quote here, we demonstrate an example of support for Palestine as being a hate rally. So associating protests, so in this quote, you'll see a Calgary man, Calgary is a city in Canada, was arrested by police and accused of using anti-Semitic phrase during a rally, and is facing charges due to disturbance and hate motivation. And they're facing particularly charges regarding hate and anti-Semitism, and the reporting here demonstrates that. So associating protests against genocide and occupation with anti-Semitism falsifies a sense of fear and alarm within the Jewish community and reinforces the idea that any criticism of Israel is inherently anti-Semitic, which is false. Other reports of rallies refer to the protesters as disruptive and disturbing public peace. So just want to show a little bit more about what that looks like, because this is the bulk of the reporting that comes out of the CBC. So we have some more quotes on the screen here demonstrating Palestinians as savage or as terrorists. So these phrases that you'll see here paint Palestinians as aggressive perpetrators of violence, and the repeated citation of high Israeli casualty figures. So you'll see here, there's a frequent reporting of how many casualties are taking place as a result of Hamas attacks. This kind of repeated reference further serves to highlight the scale of violence that is attributed to Hamas and consolidates depictions of Palestinians as savage while ignoring them as the real victims of genocide. Not to mention that the frequent references to hostages. So we have a number of quotes here, the horrific attacks of terrorism, condemnations of atrocities and hostages being taken place, hostages being taken. These frequent references paint Palestinians as terrorists and erase the reality of the hostage situation, the actual reality of the hostage situation, and obscure the crimes Israel commits by taking hostages of their own, not to mention the treatment of Palestinian hostages and detainees that have been in detainment since long before October 7th, 2023.
Thank
So
you.
phrases.
Maimuna, you have only 1 minute to finish your conclusion, please.
Okay, no problem.
I give you 4 minutes extra, so please.
No problem.
Try to finish within 1 minute, please.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. We're actually almost done. So actually, Dr. Al-Lahib, I'll pass it back to you. You can go to the next slide.
Well, again, because silence is complicity, we chose not to be silent, and we must call out the CBC and all the media complicity, and we must enact discursive resistance against Western complicity, and we will end with Free Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. شكرا. يعني حقيقة أنا هذا البحث أثارني، يعني فكرة الدقة والبعد الاستخدام الذكي للبارادايمز التحليلية اللي فيه. حقيقة يعني هو يمكن اختصاره دراميا وخطابيا أننا أمام نسقين من اللغة، نسقة المدعي العام ونسقة المحامي. كان المحامي في صالح الرواية الصهيونية وكان المدعي العام ضد الفلسطينيين. كانت لغة الوصف والموضوع بالعلاقة مع الإسرائيليين، وكانت لغة التوصيف والتصنيف ملتصقة بالفلسطينيين. هذا يعني نسق خطابي يعني يسم كل الخطاب الغربي بمعظم اللغات الغربية. شكرا على الدقة، شكرا على التعب في هذا البحث اللي أنا أعتقد أنه مرجع تاريخي سيكون.